and welcome to Murphy's Garden. And it's the 1st of April, so beginning of spring, the sun's out and it's just glorious. And in this video I want to just run through what I do at this time of year in the herbaceous borders, just to try and ensure that the borders look good during the growing season, during the summer, and the plants put on the best performance possible. So mostly these plants behind me are herbaceous perennials. So a herbaceous plant is one that has non-woody stems above ground, and herbaceous plants fall into three main categories. So there are annuals, there are biennials, and there are perennials. So an annual is a herbaceous plant that has its whole life cycle in one growing season. And a biennial is a plant that takes 2 years to complete its biological life. And then herbaceous perennial is a plant that comes back for at least 2 years. So it dies right back and then it comes back usually time and time again, but certainly more than 2 years. So most of the plants in these borders are herbaceous perennials. So I grow mostly herbaceous perennials, but then I do use annuals to pop in and just fill in any gaps that appear in the perennial borders, and annuals just add that pop of colour. So things like cosmos and zinnias and all these lovely plants, which I generally grow from seed, I grow them on, and then when gaps start to appear, sort of about May time, I start to see where there might be some gaps. I put those in and they provide sort of the bit of the showiness and the wow factor in the borders. Biennials in this garden tend to be things that self-seed. So I have in the past grown some from seeds, and I've got some this year which are some digitalis or foxgloves, but mostly, more often than not, the biennials come from the self-seeders. So in the spring, in a few weeks' time, we'll have a magnificent display of Aquilegia, or the granny bonnets, and they just self-seed and they come up with all sorts of combinations. They cross-pollinate and we get all sorts of lovely surprises. So I kind of think of them as the kind of fairy dust. They are the little sprinklings of surprises that you perhaps haven't planned, you wouldn't have thought of doing, but some of the combinations we get are absolutely lovely. So for that reason, biennials are also really, really valuable in the herbaceous borders. So to keep herbaceous plants looking at their best, there are a few things to do at this time of year to ensure a good performance. So I'm going to run through in this video what to do. So the first thing to do is to cut back the herbaceous perennials that you haven't already. Some of you may have already done this, and it can be done anytime from autumn through to spring. But it's now thought that really, if possible, it's best to leave the growth over the winter period, because the seed heads are a good source of food for the birds, and they also provide shelter for the birds and insects too. And best of all, they also protect the plants from very hard winters. And we have had a hard winter, so any extra protection that will help them make it through the winter months. But now in spring, this is the time to cut back that dead foliage, and that will ensure that it looks nicer and also improves the flowering for the season ahead. And then the next thing to do is to weed the borders. So weeding often isn't seen as a very glamorous part of gardening. It's not terribly exciting. However, I actually find it quite therapeutic in a way, and it's a chance to get down and up close to all your plants and just look at them and examine their health from the winter period. So time spent weeding at this time of year is really good, because it will stop weeds in their tracks and stop them getting established, and certainly stop them going to seed, which can be problematic if you don't catch them in time. So it's a good time to do it. I tend to use either a spade or a fork for this. But more recently I've discovered a little gadget called a homie. A homie is a Korean tool, and instead of with a spade and a fork, it's this kind of action, which sometimes kind of has a habit of sort of jarring your hand, and if you've got a lot to do, as I have, then sometimes your hand gets really sore and a bit stiff. So the homie is a different action. It's a kind of pulling action, and it's got this point on it, so it pulls out the weeds from the roots, and it's really quite effective. So I really quite like that. So if you haven't got one of those, that might be something to invest in. And then while you're down looking at all the plants, you may notice that some of your herbaceous perennials are starting to look a bit sort of dead in the middle, and this is because herbaceous perennials have a habit of growing outwards, so the new vigorous growth is on the outside, and sometimes after a period of time what happens is the middle bit gets quite dead and woody looking and quite unattractive, and you get this vigorous growth on the outside but not great growth in the middle. And if that's happening, then this is the time to split the plant. So herbaceous perennials generally should be split every 2 or 3 years, and the best time to split them is either in the autumn or spring. They can be split at any time of year, but if the ground is very dry, then it's really not a good idea. It's best to do it on moist soil. So tend to do it either in March to May or in the autumn, sort of September through to November. If you're doing it on plants that are a little bit tender, then I would leave it till the spring just to be on the safe side. And with plants such as irises, if you can and if you remember to do it in the autumn, that's probably better because they're early flowering. But having said that, I tend to just do it when I see a plant that needs to be split. I tend to do it either in the spring or the autumn when the need arises, because if I don't do it there and then I know I'll have a habit of just forgetting about it and I'll miss it. So I tend to just do it when it needs done, and as long as it's well watered in afterwards, then it will be fine. And with the weather that we've had here in the UK, it's been very, very wet. So the soil is absolutely perfect for this at this time of year. So to split plants, I generally go round with a spade, dig all the way around the outside. For small fibrous plants such as hostas or eucharas, this is quite easy to do, and you can generally just sort of tease the plants apart with your hands and then just replant them either in the same position, discarding the sort of old dead bit in the middle, and replant them where they were before, or if you want to get some plants for free, you can put some in a different location. So that's fairly easy to do. But for perennials that are large, have large fibrous roots, then sometimes that's a little bit trickier. So do the same, dig all the way round, and I've always used a spade for this, and sometimes it is rather hard work. Some of you may watch the John Lord videos, and John Lord always uses a mattock, and Alistair, my husband, he does the same. He finds that really good. Mattocks are big, heavy, a bit like a big axe really. They're quite heavy and unwieldy, and I haven't used it. When I tried to lift it, I thought, gosh, it's quite heavy. But I did have a go at doing it. Alistair explained that the way to use it is not to kind of wield it above your body or anything, but it's just a very light action where you're lifting it up and letting gravity do all the work. So gravity, as you drop it back down, it just seems to get under the plant and does most of the work for you. So I did have a go at doing it. I have just split some irises, and I just used the mattock to get underneath the plant, and actually it was really, really easy. So that's something you might want to consider if you're finding it a bit knackering doing it with the old spade. So once plants are lifted, they can be divided by cutting through the roots with a spade. Some people use 2 forks back to back and use that to prise the plants apart. I've always found that quite difficult. I've never really found that really worked for me. And I've always tended just to use a spade and dig the plant up, put it on its side and cut it, jump on the spade and cut it to divide the plant up. And you can divide the plant up into lots of pieces and replant it where it was growing before, or put it in a new location to make more plants. I have discovered a new tool called a root slayer. Sounds quite dramatic, and it really is quite good at doing what it says. It goes through the roots with great ease. So it's a really good piece of equipment to make this job easier. It's a hard job and quite exhausting, but this certainly makes it a lot easier to do. So yeah, when you are replanting the plant, it's a good idea to, at this point, dig the hole and then just put a little bit of bone meal or some bloodfish and bone or something in the hole, just to give it a little bit of extra nutrition, and also some compost as well. I always add a bit of garden compost when I replant anything. It's a good opportunity just to get some good compost down near the roots, and that will ensure that the plants grow back really strongly. And water the plant once you've planted it as well. And if there isn't any rain in the sort of the weeks ahead, then you might need to just top it up every now and again. But for us here in the UK, we've had loads of rain, so this is a perfect time to split plants. Really, really good to do, and the soil's nice and easy to work. So cover the plant with the compost, and you're good to go. Now, while you're in the process of feeding any new plants, it's a great opportunity to feed all the borders. So I tend to go round with just either some bone meal or some bloodfish and bone or some garden granular fertiliser, and just go round and liberally cast it all over the borders, because this is the time when plants are growing really, really quickly. So if you can give them a little bit of an extra boost at this time, that's really good. Now, the next thing to do is to add mulch to the borders, and I'm using garden compost. So we've got these big compost heaps, and we are making quite a lot of compost now, but I must admit I find it's never really enough. You never quite have enough to do everywhere you want to, but this is quite nice stuff. It's well rotted. It's a mixture of all the garden waste which we shred up. We put leaves on here, we put horse manure on here, so it's quite a nice mix of a bit of everything really. But you can use all sorts of things to mulch your borders, anything that's biodegradable, like bark chippings or spent mushroom compost, horse manure or farmyard manure. I tend to use them with a little bit of caution, because I have found when I've used horse manure in the past or farmyard manure, it's got weed seeds in it, and I've had a lot of nettles and things that have grown up. If you do use it, make sure it's very well rotted too, because if it's too hot it can burn the plants. Also, it can be quite cloddy if it's not broken up well, so and it makes it difficult for little small seeds to grow through it. So this is nice because it's nice and crumbly. So if you're going for horse manure, make sure it's well rotted and this sort of consistency. We've had all this rain, so it's a brilliant time to do that. So once your borders are weed free, don't mulch on top of weeds, but weed first and then mulch. And that means the plants can withstand any dry weather that comes to them later on in the season. It will suppress the weeds as well, and just add nutrients to the soil, and also improve the soil structure if done. I want to try and do this sort of every year, really try and improve this soil. We are on very sandy soil, so for us, if the more organic matter I can add to our soil, the better. And it's challenging ever having enough, really. That's the biggest problem I've always had, is just haven't got enough to cover the whole garden. It's tempting to scrimp on it and try and put a little bit everywhere, but the best advice is to do one area really, really well, rather than try and make it go around the whole garden. So do perhaps this area really well this year, and then next year do another area, and do it every other year very well, rather than every year not so well. So after the borders are all covered in mulch, they start to look really, really beautiful, and they're just looking nice, and the bulbs are all coming through. It's looking good, and you'll see lots of luscious growth with every little bit of sunshine that comes out. The plants really, really start to romp away.
So the next thing to do is just to add some stakes to your plants. So as you can see, at this time of year, they're putting on lots and lots of new growth. And as they grow, it's a good idea to add the stakes at this stage. So I am going to be doing this in the coming weeks. I'm going to just do this one now. This is a peony, but what you find if you don't stake your plants is that it's just a bit risky, really. If we get winds, high winds, then they can snap, and it just really spoils the display. So I find if you do it very early on, then the plants naturally grow through the supports. They don't look kind of trussed up and restricted, and they grow very naturally, and you don't even, after a few weeks, you don't even see the supports. So I like to do it quite early, so I'm going to be doing that in the coming weeks, and I'll show you what I do. You can buy some plant supports, but it ends up working out really expensive if you've got a big garden, or if you've got lots of plants that you want to support. So I tend to do it in quite a cheap way, just using bamboos. So I'll show you what I do in the coming videos, but for now I'm just going to do it on this peony. This is quite a good one to use on a peony. So I'll just add the supports. So I'm just going to use this type of plant support on this peony, and if I put it on nice and early, then the plant will just grow through it and you won't even notice it.
Orders are now prepared, just a bit more staking to do in the coming weeks, but they're looking nice, they're all ready, and hopefully they'll put on a good show for us this summer. It's quite exciting. It's like the anticipation of some exciting performance that's to come. So with a bit of luck, with all the preparation we've done, hopefully we'll get a good display. Thank you very much for watching, and join us again in the next video. Bye for now.